It's finally time. Time to fulfill a dream of mine that's been on the back of my mind for 8 years. And out of all the great dreams a guy can have, my dream has to do with these ominous looking things. What are these, you ask? Great question. The answer is, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I have a pretty good idea of what they are, but hear me out. What's more important than what they are is what they represent, okay? If you're confused at this point, don't worry. I was 2 when I got these, 8 years ago. At the time we had recently founded a tiny media production company with my brother, and we had a cheap little office space in this industrial facility. And I wish I had photos of the origin of these things. But essentially a guy in a neighboring production facility came up to us and said that they are moving away from the place, and so they had to tear down their anechoic chamber. And he asked us if we'd be interested in taking some of these absorber elements, since we are working with audio and video and stuff. So I'm standing there in a big hall full of these spiky things everywhere, and at that moment, looking at these things, the dream is born. I want to someday have a studio space at my home that's completely my own, where I can compose and record music and make videos. And I want to make acoustic absorbers for the studio from these very elements here. The problem is that I was a 22-year-old college dropout, barely making enough money to survive to the next month, fighting with rats to claw together something edible from other people's trash. Yeah, okay, maybe that was a bit of an exaggeration. In reality, I had things pretty well because I live in Finland, and I've always had a good safety net around me. But yeah, I was a broke young guy, full of dreams, and clearly there's quite a few things that need to happen before this particular studio dream can become a reality. But I mean, wouldn't you also trust this intelligent-looking guy to make it big in the media industry? At the time, I didn't worry about how far off I was from having my own studio. I just wanted to get those absorbers, because clearly I'll never get a deal like this again, right? I mean, look at these fantastic things. The fact that they are a bit rough around the edges just adds character to them. And it's not like these take up a lot of space, right? We did pay that guy like 20 euros for these, but I knew that good quality absorbers can get really expensive. So I was packing these up in the hall in the evening in a hurry because the guys would throw everything in the trash the next day. And guess who was there helping me that evening? My future wife. We were engaged at the time and getting married soon. And I know what you're all thinking. Like, this doesn't really seem like how on earth did you make this happen? Yeah, I know. Maybe I wasn't much of a looker, but sometimes it's more about the intellect, as you can clearly see from this impeccable taste in hats. Anyway, so she got to know these absorbers very early on. Little did she know what she was getting herself into. Did I mention that these give off a lot of these weird black crumbs? And they also tend to stain your hands. Just a little bit though. Anyway, I wanted to store as many of these as I could for the future. But I didn't have any space for them. The office was really small, the flat was really small, so I put on my best behavior and went to my mother. Luckily for me, I have amazing parents, and thanks to them I now had a temporary place for the absorbers. And from this point on, time starts speeding up in the story. I get married to my amazing wife, and for the first time there's now an actual framework to think about a permanent home. Me and my brother managed to establish a big enough customer base for our company to provide a somewhat reliable income for us. Me and my wife find a plot of land near us that we completely fall in love with, and we take a loan to buy it, but it ends up taking years before anything happens on that land. Our first child is born. 2 years fly by in a fog, and then the second child is born. Our small apartment becomes a little too cramped for us, so we move into a slightly bigger apartment that has a small storage unit. What a great place to store some absorbers, right? It's not like a newborn child brings with themselves a lot of new stuff that needs to be stored. Unfortunately, the absorbers didn't all fit in our storage unit, and we had to leave some of them at my parents' place. So they were now annoying both my wife and my mother, which was great. The business started to slowly grow, and for the first time we were doing well enough that me and my wife were able to take the mortgage to start building that dream house. The house gets built, and at the same time we were having a small garage being built to eventually become that dream studio for me. But we ran out of the loan money before the garage was ready. We only had enough money for the rest of the materials, but not for the labor of actually building it. So I had to start building the rest of it myself, with some help from my family. And it now of course takes a lot more time because of my very limited tools and skills, and only working at it in the evenings. But I made steady progress with it, and we also finally got to move into our new, slightly unfinished, amazing dream house. Absorbers and all. And hey, we could now store all of the absorbers, right? So my parents finally get rid of them, but my wife only now realizes just how many there actually is. So I try to hide them here and there, to not have one enormous pile that would gain too much attention. That of course only leads to the wife bumping into them in different unexpected places. And there's this one problem. I've been having a nagging feeling that these are not actually acoustic absorbers. I knew that these kind of things are somehow related to some electronics manufacturing stuff also. And the company that gave these to us was doing some electronics stuff. I didn't know more about it though, so I just kept these around in case they are still good for acoustic use also. You might be wondering why I didn't just, Google what they are before spending years storing them. And I've been wondering that too. The human brain is weird. I just kept thinking like I'll do it someday. And before you know it, it's been 5 years and you still haven't just sat down in front of a computer for 10 minutes to look it up. But I did eventually do that, about 5 years in. So I finally got to know that these are not in fact acoustic absorbers. They are microwave absorbers, designed to absorb electromagnetic radiation in electronics testing chambers. At this point I was really sweating that I'd been idiotically storing these huge things for nothing. But then I found out that these might actually work relatively well for acoustic absorption too. I won't go into too much detail here, but essentially the wavelengths of microwaves that these are rated for happen to be pretty close to the wavelengths of sound that I was looking to absorb with these things. And these are apparently polyurethane foam that's loaded with graphite dust, which means that they are actually heftier than many of the regular acoustic absorbers. So I thought this might be pretty good at absorbing acoustic waves also. And yeah, luckily they also seem to be compliant with some health standards. And that synthetic graphite dust I was a bit worried about is apparently completely harmless and inert in these kind of small amounts. So that weird cough I've been having recently has to be something else then, right? Okay, but in all seriousness, things were looking great and I was getting very close to having the studio finished. But then a disaster happened. Yeah, that is water dripping out of the floor of our brand new house. A water pipe had been leaking through the entire floor because of an accident during the building of the house. Luckily it wasn't our fault at all, but it meant that we had to move away for a while the whole floor was torn up and rebuilt to deal with the water damage. That sucked, of course. But the repairs went well, the house is all good now, and we were able to move in again for the second time a couple months later. And I finally got to put in the finishing touches to the studio room and started making the absorbers. And yeah, making these things was definitely a bit of a therapeutic thing for me. Obviously you've now catched on with the idea that this story is much less about these absorbers specifically and more about the journey. These silly, spiky things with their backstory just happen to be such a fantastically funny element that's been a common thread through all these years of dreaming about the studio. The frames came out a bit wonky because I made them from some wonky leftover wood, and the absorber elements themselves have definitely seen better days. But I really love these things. They bring me happiness and good memories every time I see them. Yeah, so here they are. After all these years, they are now ready. And they seem to be working surprisingly well based on my initial testing. But of course the most important thing for me is that the studio room is ready. Well, almost ready. There's still a lot of things that I need to do with the furniture. This room is quite literally a dream come true for me. It's my own little creative space that's completely separate from the actual house, which means that I can blast music here at night and the wife and kids aren't bothered. I can play the piano, cello, I can record music, make videos, and I have absorbers that are made from these very elements here that I got from that office building 8 years ago.